I recently had the honor to meet Ambassador James Sweeney, an energetic, intelligent, yet modest man in his 70s. He belongs to the greatest generation of the 20th century who won the war that would enslave the world. He's led a fascinating, productive life and is a tremendous role model for all Americans to emulate. Here now is a life remembered, a conversation with Ambassador James Sweeney, American Patriot, Part 2.
But I got an offer from White Sands Missile Range with the government, with the U.S. Army, as an industrial engineer down at White Sands Missile Range in the southern part of New Mexico.
Highly classified.
So I took that job. Well, what I was doing there in my early job, my first job was as a test engineer. What we were doing was testing Army's anti-aircraft missiles, the missiles that shoot down the airplanes, the Hawk, Nike Hercules, and we were doing evaluation of test data. So I was doing evaluation of test data and the performance of these missiles on testing to make sure that they met the criteria that had been defined by the program managers. And I spent about a year and a half or so in that job. And then I left and got a very lucrative offer from General Dynamics in San Diego. So I went to work in San Diego with General Dynamics Astronautics Division on the Atlas program, which was the first intercontinental ballistic missile, the first long-range missile the United States was developing. And that was the most fascinating job I had. I was working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. It was a very hectic, very intense.
Is that because of the pressure of the Cold War at the time to sort of get the program accelerated?
Exactly.
Right.
The Russians had just put up their Sputnik. It was 1957, exactly. They had just put up their Sputnik, and we were struggling to catch up with the Russians at that time. And so this missile was the answer to the Russians. I spent a lot of time at Vandenberg Air Force Base in Northern California, where we would actually launch our missiles. And in that period of time, I learned a tremendous amount about missile technology and what have you. And about that time, my mother became sick, became ill, and so I wanted to come back home to New Mexico. So I applied for a job and got a job at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And lo and behold, the reason they hired me because of my Atlas experience, my Atlas background. They wanted an Atlas project engineer to work on the development of the nuclear warhead for the Atlas missile. And that's where I got into the nuclear weapons business. So I came out to Kirtland Air Force Base as a young engineer and worked initially on the Atlas, ensuring the nuclear safety of the Atlas, making sure that it was safe, that it would not accidentally blow up out in the field.
So if the missile, something happened to the missile, then the actual armament would not also go down with it.
Would not explode, exactly.
Right.
If we had an accident with a missile because it was a liquid-fueled missile, it was not solid-fueled, if it was, for some reason, blew up accidentally, the nuclear warhead would not go yield, would not have any yield at all.
That must have been one heck of a project.
It's a very challenging thing. So nuclear safety was paramount. And I spent a lot of time working nuclear safety. And in fact, as on the first missile, one of the rules, we had to go through a review, an intensive review within the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy, who handled the weapon itself. And we integrated them both. And we said we would have to, there was 4 DoD safety standards. And I won't get into the details of them. But the one that I was concerned about was there shall be positive measures to prevent the deliberate, unauthorized launch, releasing of a nuclear weapon.
That was like, for example, the first commandment and no other commandments.
That was one of the most important. So that we had to make positive, we had to have technical measures built into the missile and to the command and control system, the nuclear command and control system, to make sure that that missile couldn't be launched accidentally by someone. So anyone.
Did you ever find yourself in a situation where it could be launched?
Well, we did. Let me tell you what we did in that case on the Atlas missile. I recommended that we have 2 switches instead of 1 switch. so that one person couldn't launch it. So we
Is
had
that
to
where
have
the double key factor come in?
We had to have double keys, and we had a key on the first floor, and then we put the key on the second floor, where one guy couldn't go up and turn the key
simultaneously.
Because we had a 3-second timer. You had to turn both keys within 3 seconds. That was my recommendation, and it was accepted by.
And it's still used today. You see it everywhere.
It's still used. It became one of the primary criteria. You have 2 keys, and today all our nuclear forces have 2 keys that have to be turned within a certain period of time. 3 seconds was the time we had at that time. But later on, I worked on a larger missile, the Titan II, which was a missile that was the largest missile we had. The missile itself was about 103 feet long, and the nuclear warhead was the largest we had in the U.S. inventory. I can state this now because it's unclassified or out of commission, but the warhead was 9.3 megatons.
Megatons?
Megatons.
How big was that compared to the Hiroshima?
Well, the one in Hiroshima was 13 kilotons.
Tiny.
Tiny. So this was hundreds of magnitudes larger.
Like the Chinese are using.
Exactly. Exactly. So, well, the Chinese are even larger. But that gets into. But anyhow, I was able. One of the things I had to do was examine the system, make sure it was not vulnerable to insider or what have you, launching it accidentally or deliberately launching it.
So you purposely went out to see the faults of the system.
Exactly.
So you could correct
exactly, the vulnerabilities of the system.
Vulnerability.
I went out and I looked at the design, and I found that I could, with unclassified information, could launch the missile in 5 minutes.
Wait a minute. You found a way to launch a missile without any restrictions?
Exactly. I would bypass the presidential switch and launch it in 5 minutes.
You mean you sat there in front of a missile and said you could literally push the button and make it take off?
I wouldn't push the button. I would do other things.
To make it launch. So you found the major weakness in the system.
You'd hotwire it.
I'd hotwire it. Exactly. I would go down to the launch signal responder, we called it. It was a control panel down in the silo. And from there I would hotwire it, and launch it.
So you were not hotwiring
so
Chevys, you were hotwiring missiles.
The people up at the top that were on the control panel would never know that it had been launched.
Wow.
All they would know is that they could not stop it. There was no inhibit feature in the missile.
Once it took off, it was gone.
Now, so that's right, it took off. And so this was a vulnerability we had to fix, obviously. And it became a very sensitive issue. And I was up in the Pentagon briefing the Secretary of the Air Force.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. We had a Latino for 5 minutes who had the capability of starting World War III.
Exactly. We could have started World War III.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for, I'm glad we're here talking. And
well, that's right.
the trust factor was huge.
It was important, very important. But to be able to find that vulnerability, that was the key.
Right.
And I was the party that did that. Incidentally, I got a very large reward for this.
I think you were entitled to anything you wanted, that you didn't blow us off, that the system could have blown us off.
As a matter of fact, when I went to the Pentagon and I briefed this through various levels, I had to go through various levels to brief this, with everybody trying to shoot me down. They were trying to prove me that was false.
It couldn't have been done.
I went out to the field. In fact, as I came down here to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, right here in Arizona, and we put in a test system, and I proved to them that I could do it.
You actually triggered it, even though it was under a control basis?
Yeah, a control basis, exactly. Right. Not on a real basis. It was just a control basis.
Just to demonstrate that it could be done.
To the people that in command, Strategic Air Command at Offutt. They were the people that were in command of the missiles. They were the ones that were skeptical. Anyhow, after proving it to them through a test, then I went up to the Pentagon and briefed the Secretary of the Air Force.
Who was he at the time?
McLucas, Dr. McLucas. I briefed Dr. McLucas, and what he said is, he says, we have a Frankenstein here. This cannot get into the Washington Post.
No, I don't think it ever did, thank God.
No, never. So it became very highly classified. And they said, we have to develop a fix. So then I was involved in developing the fix. Anyhow, that was an accomplishment that I felt was rather significant at an early age, and obviously resulted in my moving up in the command in the structure of the organization. I was promoted rather rapidly. At an age of 33, 34, I was equivalent to a lieutenant colonel, and I was managing people. At that point in time, I was in a position to help other Hispanics and other people.